Hey y'all, we're just gonna wait for a few more folks to come in and then we'll begin. We'll begin at 11. All right, y'all. We're gonna begin. So thank you everyone who joining us today, and Chag Sameach. And I would just like to begin with first just grounding us all together and just oh, great, hold on. Alana's gonna do a little intro and then we'll begin.
Apologies, thank you. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Alana, and I am the Community Programs Manager at Wilderness Torah. And just wanted to give you a little bit of context around the virtual village. I'm so happy that you all are here. In response to these uncertain times and unfortunate cancellation of our annual Passover in the Desert Festival, we decided to use all of our energy to create the virtual village. And as part of awakening the earth-based traditions of Judaism, Wilderness Torah creates village life during our immersive land-based festivals, such as Passover in the Desert, by uplifting and encouraging the individual gifts of our collective community. So 3 times a week in this virtual village space, you will learn from Wilderness Torah community members like Ophir, who are sharing their gifts, as well as longtime stakeholders in the earth-based Jewish movement. Some of those may include rabbis, priestesses, and many others. Sessions are going to range in topics from Torah study to nature connection to spirituality and embodiment practices. As an organization whose mission is to awaken and celebrate earth-based traditions of Judaism, we're looking towards nature and asking, what can this time really teach us? So we're really excited that y'all are part of our virtual village. And if you would like to support Wilderness Torah in our efforts in this virtual space, we welcome any and all donations, big or small, as we provide Jewish wisdom and community building through this hard time. If you're new to Wilderness Torah or would like to find out more about what we do, Malka will put a link to our website. And just so all of you know, this session is being recorded, and we're going to have archive videos on our website. So feel free to check back there. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, Ilana. So welcome everyone who just joined, and I'm excited to be learning with y'all today and in conversation around this very juicy topic. And before we begin, I'm just going to invite us all to just take a moment to close our eyes and just tune into ourselves, make sure that we're grounded, make sure that we really feel firmly the seat beneath us or the ground beneath us, and just really come to the present moment, come here together as a collective. It's hard enough, in the computer, and there's so many distractions to really come together and be a unit learning together. And so just taking a moment to connect to our breath and to connect to the ground and to our intention for being here. And yeah, gently come back to the room as you can. And yeah, I'm just, like I said, I'm excited. Chag Sameach, everyone. I'm excited to do this conversation on this pretty big Jewish day in these times. And so to begin with, I'm just going to give a little introduction about me and just a little bit, again, an overarching idea of what the session is going to be about. And so I'm Ophir. My relationship to Wilderness Torah, I've been, like Ilana said, I've been a long time stakeholder here. And I used to manage the festivals for Wilderness Torah, so I used to work on staff. And yeah, I've really stepped into the work of men's work and deconstructing patriarchy and men's work in a Jewish setting. And so I've been working with Moshe House. I've done over 5 men's retreats with them for young Jewish men between the ages of 20 and 40, a space for vulnerability and releasing some conditioning that doesn't serve us, both in our relation to ourselves and to each other as a group of men, and to all our relations with also women and non-binary folks in our lives. And I also work with Shalom Bayit, which is the Jewish Bay Area Center for Domestic Abuse. I've been working with them on launching their men's program, which is called Mensch Up, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. And also, given the reality that it actually in many Jewish homes, which I was surprised to really find out about as I was working with the organization, many women don't feel safe in their home, and so it's a lot of preventative work, so it doesn't get to that point. And so that's just a little bit about me, and then as it relates to this session, and a little bit about the session, we're just going to talk about what is patriarchy and how does it relate to our Jewish text, our Jewish community, to the Passover story, and how across all denominations can we move towards a non-patriarchal framework. And it'll be kind of a mix of both text study and sharing, as well as group discussion. And so I really welcome and invite your voice and expertise and whatever is coming up for you. And as a groundwork for just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what is patriarchy, because it's such a loaded word and it's been used in so many different contexts. And so I just want to give just a textbook definition of it, and we can start with that and work off of it. And so patriarchy is a social system in which men hold the primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. Some patriarchal societies are also patrilineal, meaning the property and title are inherited by male lineage. And so that's kind of like a little bit more of the old feudal aspect of the definition. And just a little bit of my own story share of how I've kind of felt patriarchy in my Jewish upbringing. I'm originally from Israel, and I grew up in a kibbutz and then moved to the United States and to St. Louis, Missouri, and also grew up in the Jewish community there. And also would go every year. And my grandparents are Orthodox Moroccan Jews. And so in that household, it was always told that girls don't read from the Torah, girls don't wear yarmulke in Israel, because most of the synagogues are Orthodox. It's changing now, but most girls don't read from the Torah as part of their bat mitzvah. And my grandpa would always invite only the men to come within to synagogue, and the woman would have a separated curtain area, as many of you may have experienced. And also another thing that kind of I observed growing up is that my grandma, I'm currently a chef and I love to cook, and my grandma would always be like, discourage me from even joining, because she's like, oh yeah, the men have to study and do this important work here. And so the gender roles really became clear in the Orthodox setting. And I know a lot of us are coming from a renewal setting, so we're going to kind of talk about or a reform setting. And so we're going to also talk about how that may show up there as well. And so that just kind of over time, I really felt the impact of that. And so that's one of the things besides the larger overarching societal patriarchal conditioning that we're going to get into that also I felt the impact of. And I don't know if many of you have seen it, but now it's actually a big thing going around on Netflix. Is this movie called Unorthodox, which talks about, okay, I see a few people who've seen it, which talks about which really shows and exhibits the patriarchal ways in the Hasidic households in New York, and actually bringing that really to the forefront, and to the really big public eye outside of those communities. And so before we begin our study, I just am curious, and I would love for you to close your eyes and sense when I say the word patriarchy, because that word has so much, like I said, has so many different significances to each and every one of us. And I want to see what comes up to us, and especially thinking about our Jewish communities and our Jewish upbringing or the Jewish text, what comes up to us when we think of the word patriarchy. And I'm really inviting you to sit for a second with any of the memories or any of the connotations that come up for you. And over the course of the session, I would love for you to actually write it on the chat on the side, just a few, like a sentence or two of something that's coming up for you. So I'm gonna, the session could go on forever. There's like so much we can cover in the session. So bear with me as I'm just gonna cover a little bit of it. And there's gonna be a little time for questions. And as you have questions coming up or topics that are related to this that you really wanna address and talk about as a group, then feel free again to just put that in the chat on the side, and we can see if we can get to it or not. How does that feel? Good to everyone? Thumbs up? Good, great. So I'm gonna just give a few text references to just different texts that I found where patriarchy and as the definition I explained before was like very blatant. And of course, I mean, there's like all throughout the text and through the languaging that can be picked up. So like I said, this could go on for a lot longer, but I'm just going to give a few examples. So one is from Samuel. The book of Samuel is about King David, and King David, as I know too, as I was acquainted to that archetype, to that character, was really kind of celebrated leader. And there's a story where he saw this woman Bathsheba bathing on a rooftop. And as the story goes, he decided that he wanted her. And he summoned her. And after he summoned her, in different ways, basically raped her. And then had her husband killed in an attempt to cover up his crime, as the text says. And so for me, that just kind of really felt like a pretty blatant example of toxic masculinity that then goes on to having a character that's celebrated in some ways and not being overshadowed and glossed over. And if you have other ideas around that story or text, please feel free once again to write it. And I'm also going to talk about this midrash taught from Otsar HaMidrashim in Masiyot that has this 13th century story midrash that has 5 different male archetypes that all, I feel like, have a different angle of patriarchy. And so I'm going to go through that one. It's just something fun, and it's probably a story that most of us have never heard. And so there's, in the midrash, there is a woman, and she's being sentenced to death. And she's being sentenced to death. I won't tell why, but anyway, she was raped in the story. And so in the story, there is first, she was raped by her brother-in-law, and he attemptedly repeated to rape her. And then she accused her brother-in-law, and there were men, like there are so many men in her family who just did not listen to her testimony. And not only did they not listen to her testimony, they offered false testimony in court, showing how that could have not happened. And so the men in the court, because the court was all run by men, sentenced her to death. And then there was one redeeming factor, and there's another man family friend who hired her as a teacher for his son, and kind of convinced the court that she shouldn't be sentenced to death because he has a role for her as a teacher for his son. That's like a really important role, and he had a lot of authority within the group. He was esteemed in that community, and so even this guy was basically saying, like, it's okay, like it's not even her moral authority. It's just like, I actually have a role for her, so that, which is better for her than death. But it wasn't about, like, because she deserves her autonomy, she deserves her freedom, to be listened to her truth. It just, for me, shows, I mean, obviously we've advanced a lot since the 13th century, but it just shows some subtle influences in the text and in our culture that may have carried over till now. And especially if you see in many of the Hasidic communities and more religious communities, as, like I said, the new movie or series is showing. So that's just, those are just two examples in the text. And I want to kind of get to Passover, and I just also understand that story and can bring up a lot up for all of us. And so I invite you to sit with that. And if you need to excuse yourself or whatever it may be, and feel your body, like I don't want you to just move on and be with it if you're not feeling uncomfortable, because I do understand that can bring up a lot. And I do want to go over some Passover patriarchal examples, and I actually want to open it up so we can each kind of like bring in some. I'll start us off of things that I've picked up in Passover, and then I'm curious to see how we, because really that's for me the most important focus right now is Passover, because that's so relevant to today, and I'm just curious of how y'all see it, both in the Seder and in the different Haggadot. And I know we all are using different Haggadot, and some of us are using radically progressive Haggadot. And so that might not be the case, but maybe within our families or in our communities that we practice with, even in a Zoom call if someone already did an early Seder. So some things that I've seen, well, like in the traditional settings, men usually read from the Haggadah. And so that's already one thing. And we usually only leave a cup for Elijah as a prophet, and Miriam Hanaviyah, the prophetess is in her name, is kind of like, and there's actually many different rabbinical commentary that completely dismiss her as being a prophetess. And we learn like another female character is Bat Pharaoh. We don't even have her name. She's just the daughter of Pharaoh, which also is, and there's something there. And then in traditional Haggadah, it's the four sons rather than the four children that many of us use now. We don't so much even know about Zipporah as Moses' wife, and what her labor was, what her influence was in terms of his whole journey with freeing the Israelites. And also we don't know about her mom. We just know about her father as Jethro in the most of the stories. And so, those are just a few examples. And also knowing that Moses is kind of the one that's usually associated with the Exodus and freeing the Jewish people, and Miriam and others are not as much praised and mentioned. So I'm going to open it up for a second, and just before we get into breakout groups, just as a group collective, just naming a few things that another examples of patriarchy that you see in Passover Seders or homes, and maybe raise your hands and we can, Alana or Marco can unmute you, or I don't know how that works. Yeah, Pat.
Unmute, yeah. I want to go back to the story of David. Can I do that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting that, of course, we all know that story. And it's an example, when the story is told or when we talk about it, the message I always get is that, see, look how we are. We hang all our dirty linen on the line. David had faults. He was flawed. And then we go on. It's like, it doesn't, we never really look at those things. At least I don't think so. And look what the flaw is, like what you're talking about. I mean, sort of examined, but not really examined features of the stories, and which sort of support the ongoingness of what you call the patriarchy.
Right, and you know something bigger is it's not even just about David, right?
Yeah, right. Not just about David, right? Because
David's just an example, but the more concerning is that the larger culture, the larger the larger cultural aspects that he demonstrates that is glossed over or ignored.
Well, just to extend that a little bit, what I really have a trouble with is that the divine God. We think of God is still comes across the language is all still very masculine. I mean, it's in some ways, unless you can just get out of any kind of gender-based way of talking about the divine mystery, it's always tends to be a masculine kind of anthropomorphic kind of image.
Thank you, Pat. Would anyone else like to share something?
I can. Sorry, I'm midday, so I'm like multitasking a little bit here with my work, but I really wanted to join this because you're amazing, Ophir. And it's a great topic. It's heavy. It's a heavy. And I just this piece of like possession and ownership, the first story you told or referred to, the book of Samuel. And this sense of like, I think there's so many ways, there obviously are so many ways to look at patriarchy, and you could do the kind of either or and continue to look at it through like a binary lens of there's men and there's the misrepresentation of women. And I think that that's really important, or the non-representation of women, and that's really important, or anyone else. And like the way that patriarchy is like this thing that's above and beyond any genders, that's like infused its way into all of us. And I took a Passover class from Pesach Stadlin last week, and he was giving this great teaching about possession and ownership over things. And he said that it comes from Nachman, is this teaching, Rabbi Nachman, who spoke of like, when you go to a beach and you see a rock or a shell you really like, and that draws your attention. And before you even think about it, you've like put this magical spell over this rock by just, that rock's been there for the whole existence of the world, the world's history. But you put your hand over that rock and you grab that rock and you put that rock in your pocket. And after like how many billions of years, all of a sudden that rock now has moved from the beach to your pocket and home with you. And and now it's like yours somehow, because you have a hand that can grab that rock, and because you felt called or felt the inclination to grab that rock. And then if somebody else like finds that rock at your house and takes that rock then is like stolen from you and becomes their rock. And like, what is that, right? And the teaching in that with like Nachman too is like, he was saying that a soul imprint is left on whatever it is we touch, whatever it is that we possess, right? And that a little piece of ourselves gets left on that object or that being, and so to like extrapolate that and take that into this conversation about patriarchy and the ways that patriarchy and like however many imprints have been left on me, and then or the ways that I feel like my own body has been stolen, and I mean that's like a deeper layers, but just like, in this time of like burning the chametz, and burning the inflated parts of ourselves, like what are the possessions that aren't actually ours that we've taken on as ours, and what are the parts of ourselves that aren't ours,
right?
So
thank you, Suze.
Yeah, and I might need to get off because I'm being texted by coworker.
Well, we love you and we're glad.
Yeah, I might join back. Okay, love.
And would anyone else like to share real quick? And we're going to go to breakout groups where everyone will be able to share as well. Amy.
Well, I joined this discussion because patriarchy has defined my whole life. And now as an older woman, it defines my life even more as I become increasingly invisible as a human being because I no longer have commodity value on the market. So I'd like to say that. And I guess I thought I was going to be more intellectual, but this is really disturbing me emotionally, which I'm really sad about. But so 2 more things. I don't think we've progressed at all since the 13th century. I think things are still the same. These men of power are given passes for their King David-like behavior, or whoever it is, the men who raped Dinah, all of them, they're still given oh, well. And then back to Pesach, we wouldn't have Pesach if it wasn't for Miriam. And nobody acknowledges that. I mean, she saved Moses' life. How could he have led the people out of Israel if she hadn't saved his life? And yet it's like this understory, which is what women's lives always are, is, oh yeah, well, that was an addendum. No, actually, we made it happen. But in the patriarchy, especially, but anyway, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And it's really important to also to also acknowledge, as we're doing the Passover, of how much hasn't changed. And if you're looking at the societal scope, and even if you're looking at just the feminine as like in the woman body, or the non-binary body, or even the man body, but also as the earth. And so there's so much there, and what gets excused, and from who's in power. And I would like us all to get into breakout groups so we can all really have a chance to share. And I know that there's some people who are coming in live, who are joining us live. And so you're not going to be necessarily part of a breakout group, but you can just take the time to journal, or if there's someone who you're sharing the space with, converse about this with them. And so, Amy, you actually really helped us lead into this conversation, which is about how have you both observed patriarchy in your community and shifts or lack thereof in your community, and how have you observed it specifically in relating to Passover, the Passover story, the Seder, whatever feels like, whatever comes up for you or feels relevant in this discussion. And so we're gonna now divide into groups so we can just each have a little time to share, since this is a conversation that really invites all of our voices. And the breakout sessions will be for 10 minutes. So just so you all know, timing wise. And Maka, I think you're dividing us into breakout groups. All right, welcome back, everyone. So we're gonna take a few minutes to actually have maybe a representative from each breakout group share what came up for them or anything that they really want to share with the rest of the group. And yeah, I just wanted to name really quickly that it's really important to be having this conversation right now, and that that part of retelling the story of Passover is telling the story of liberation. And so it's really thinking about like how really diving deeply into how we can really liberate our own tradition and our own culture. And so this is just one aspect and one important part of that journey into. So and I just want to name also one thing that Jesse, who was part of my group, shared, that he's bringing in more tenderness to the Seder. Sorry, Jesse, I hope that was okay that I shared that. But I just found it really profound, because that's actually one of the most one of the strongest ways of actually deconstructing patriarchy within our Seders and within our Jewish ritual, is to actually bring that vulnerability and bring that tenderness and also show up in that way. And so in a way that I didn't feel necessarily growing up, there was so much space for it in terms of reciting the Seder. And so that's something that's I feel really important as well to bring in. So can we have a representative who wants to share from a breakout group? You can raise your hand. I guess it would be the best way to do it. And it's fine. And if not, we can just continue. But if there's anything that someone wants to share of what they discussed in their group that they feel that would benefit the rest of the group, or something they just feel like they want to share.
This is Kimberly. I can go from breakout room 3. Yeah, we were blessed to have Amy be part of our group too, and we got to hear more of her thoughts and journey. And just like anytime anybody has extreme, like, this is important, like coming out of them, well, that's what needs to be heard right now. That's really important. And so I was grateful for that. And we also talked about how patriarchy also hurts men by putting men in certain boxes and limiting their expression or relating to emotions or forms of touch or intimacy. And, just like racism also hurts white people by having limited connection. Of course, it hurts people of color more, and differently, but it also hurts everyone, because we all lose when we only know people who look like us, right? And when we are siloed, and we all have, it's better for everyone when we have relationships and deep knowing and care for people across many lines of difference. And so, yeah, and also the idea of doing that inner work and using this as an opportunity this whole time that we're in now to do that self-care even better. We need that systemic shift, and it can begin with us and how we relate to ourselves and our little microcosms of community and how we're doing Seder and, all the little things, to take this as an opportunity to do that inner work and to do the little shifts that we can do now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Breakout group 3 and Kimberly. Does any other breakout group want to share? Okay, great. So I didn't see any hands, so I'm going to just continue if that's fine. So some ways forward that kind of like that I've kind of seen as part of a larger conversations around how do we deconstruct patriarchy in our Jewish communities and in our Jewish traditions, and there's many different resources. I'm also going to put a few on the chat to look at, and like I said, I've been, in terms of my own work, I've been really working on bringing men together with Jewish rituals and Jewish context to being containers of authenticity and vulnerability and support one another in releasing the conditioning that doesn't serve us or all our relations, and is maybe it's part of what's often termed as toxic masculinity, so we can really support one another in stepping into being safer for one another and showing up as our true selves, and then that translating over to all our relations within our community. And I'm also working with the Jewish Center for Domestic Abuse, Shalom Bayit, and like I said, on their new initiative, Mensch Up, and we're doing a big campaign in May also about just really modeling, having different men in the community really modeling what they're committing to and how they're holding themselves and each other accountable, and in really having Judaism be a safer space for all and a more empowering space. And so that's just one thing. I've also heard a lot of things in the community about gender reconciliation gatherings and councils and talks, and besides, radically reforming our traditions and making it in different ways. And there's a lot of different organizations doing that. And there's access to a lot of different Haggadot who are doing that. And, I just kind of like a little personal story that today I was making charoset. And if you don't know what charoset is, it's the sweet paste that we make. And you can make it out of many different things. Traditionally, with I think apples, walnuts, and raisins. I kind of made it with a lot of more of my different home ingredients and kind of try to make it my own little magical spin to it. But as I was making it, really giving love to it, I was just thinking about like, wow, even just a simple act of like, let's say everyone within our community just making charoset in a way that feels like they're giving them most love and tenderness to making this simple thing. Like, what radical shift would just happen just in that little small act? I don't know, just something that came up for me. But yeah, I'd love to also hear from y'all and just seeing like something you feel excited about in terms of like, as we're thinking about deconstructing patriarchy within the Jewish tradition, and kind of returning to more earth honoring, more feminine honoring ways and practices. What are you feeling excited about, and what do you want folks to know about? Yeah, Juju.
Hi. Thanks, Ophir. You're amazing. And yeah, what I'm noticing a lot is the conversation going into like patriarchy it's such a big term. It almost has like a crown around it when I see it in my head. But patriarchy starts on such a small level too. Like it's not out there. It's in every one of us. It's inside of us, and it's a part of a lot of our mindsets, even when we don't realize it. We don't even really intend to go there. But I think maybe what could be useful is for each of us to even, take it within ourselves. Like, I wonder, is what I'm offering in this moment, am I combative? Like, am I combating in a sense of, is that going to serve in my decision to be, mindful of patriarchy and how it's continuing, am I creating a situation where it's supporting patriarchy even, like I feel it has to start within us. And even though we can say, oh, patriarchy is this, and when I see patriarchy, it really enrages me. But to be honest, patriarchy is actually in us, in each one of us, and it's a matter of our own abilities to deconstruct that and to realize that we are always making history. We're always going forward, and relieving that legacy. If we're really like, making that effort genuinely.
Right. Thank you, Juju.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to note that, yeah, as we're talking about patriarchy, right, there's the way I see it, there's two fronts, right? There's the front of really seeing, like, we've all been conditioned under a patriarchal framework. So like, how does that live within us, and how we like engage and how we interact with one another. And at the same time, another front is, of course, like seeing who's in leadership and how do we hold them accountable, or what are the organizations and what's there, or what is like the larger culture of societies or synagogues or whatever it may be, and what is the culture there, and how can we change that. And so there's kind of like in a way two fronts, but we can't really do that external front without doing the internal front to complement it, because then we're not modeling a different way. Yeah, Pat.
Service, when we're in our congregation, then we need to purposely have some kinds of practices or rituals or something that we would make us more mindful of have that experience, to confront it, to look at it, and to find, to help us change our behaviors in our relationships. I mean, how do you change? We need to bring some of this into our practice.
Totally. I hear that a lot, Pat, and I would love to also stay connected with you. And that's part of, like I said, the work that we're doing with Men's Shop is really thinking about how do we bring it to different organizations and really change up the culture, and actually bring like just little practices and rituals that can really help us and guide us in that way. Yeah, I see Lily, and then it's going to be the last one because we are running out of time, and I do want to close it. And so, yeah, Lily.
One of the questions that's just come up for me when I've had other discussions like this is that I think like these conversations are, I think we would all agree, are obviously super important, and bringing in like that other half of the story, like the feminine half of the story, is a necessary thing. But one of the things I find for me is then like if we tell like the men's story and then like the women's story, I find it really easy to then be like hyper focused on gender, and then for the rest of like the situation I'm like always comparing the male and the female. And I feel like on the one hand that's like something we need to be doing and like questioning that, but then on the other hand, like I'm creating those divides by like continuously comparing and like checking that, and it's something I'm like thinking about too much. So I've just found that to be like something I have to think about balancing, is like we need to be aware of it, but then like you don't always want to be like putting things in boxes of like male and female. So like making sure it's balanced, but also making sure it's not like two boxes. I don't know, it's just a question that's come up for me.
Totally. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I really wanted to speak to that. Is we are speaking in a way in a bit of that binary, because actually like our tradition has actually set up like these pretty explicit two gender roles. And hopefully we're getting into, we're evolving our conversation to realize that one, actually there's so many different factors of power and dynamic in different roles, and it's very intersectional. And so that's just like one part of the puzzle, but it's a big part of the puzzle that's really influenced our traditions. And there's a whole spectrum too that we need to be aware of.